I'm Mr. Beat here. I'm white. Seriously, my skin color is white. Well, technically like peach, but I belong to a human group that can trace their ancestry to Europe with mostly lighter skin color. And I probably didn't have to tell you that because you can see me right now, unless you're blind. Anyway, I bring this up because you may come across some xenophobic messaging when you're doing your thing on the old internet. You all remember what xenophobia is, right?
Go back to Ireland, you dumb mitt!
You remember that, you frog?
She's back in the boot, Patty!
It's the fear of people from other countries. Now, even though this messaging is xenophobic, it's sneaky. In fact, it's terribly good at manipulating us. Despite being full of crap, and despite it probably going against everything you value and believe. I even fell for it. And I'm supposed to be smart. By the way, I'm not that smart. I just pretend to be smart on YouTube.
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. In 1939, Sanger began what was called the Negro Project, alongside black leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, Mary McLeod Bethune, and Reverend Adam Clayton Powell. This was the plan to have black doctors performing on black patients to perpetuate the sterilization of blacks who were deemed inferior, as many black patients were suspicious of white doctors.
This is Margaret Slee, president of America's Planned Parenthood Federation, maintains that European women should stop having babies for the next 10 years.
But Mrs. Slee, in this country, having babies is the only thing left which is both unrationed and untaxed. Do you think we really ought to stop?
Well, I suppose a subject like that is really so personal that it's entirely up to the parents to decide. But from my view, I believe that there should be no more babies.
The horrors of eugenics have long ago entered into the Mormon Church. Eugenics is the companion of abortion. In the Church's statement on abortion, they make a eugenics statement that one can have an abortion if pregnancy resulted from a rape or from incest. These words are commonly used in the eugenics circles. And to put it in plain English, they wish to destroy the products, babies, of rape as being a violent criminal, and destroy the products, babies, of doubling down on the genes as the father to the daughter.
While eugenics may have been mainstream in Britain and America, there were those who saw it for what it was, a pseudoscience driven more by racism than by academic research. The anthropologist Franz Boas took aim at the eugenic idea that it's our genetic makeup that determines who we become. Instead, Boas argued our social and cultural environments play a much more significant role in shaping our character and ability than anything in our DNA. Notable among the opponents of eugenics was the English author and philosopher G.K. Chesterton. In 1913, when the British Parliament was debating the Mental Deficiency Act, which led to the institutionalization of those deemed mentally deficient, Chesterton argued that the aim of such institutionalization was to prevent any person whom these propagandists do not happen to think intelligent from having any wife or children. He pointed out that anyone could be accused of mental deficiency, from tramps and labourers to eccentric rustics, concluding that is the situation and that is the point. We are already under the eugenist state, and nothing remains to us but rebellion. This was Chesterton's battle cry to the people of Europe.
If you're like 7 in 10 Americans, you probably haven't heard anything at all about Planned Parenthood killing unborn babies and then selling their body parts to the highest bidder. You've probably heard about a random dentist killing a magic lion out in Zimbabwe. You've probably heard about Miley Cyrus's armpit hair, but the media don't want you to know that your tax dollars are funding the mass murder and organ harvesting of actual children in the womb.
But anyway, A few years ago, I noticed a bunch of folks who identify as white started bringing up something called the Great Replacement. Put simply, the Great Replacement theory says that too much immigration of non-white folks to countries that are mostly made up of white folks is bad. Not only that, those who promote the Great Replacement theory argue that welcoming immigration policies for non-whites are part of a plot meant to either weaken or replace the political power and culture of white people living in Western countries. When I say Western countries, it's not just Europe I'm talking about. I'm also talking about the Americas, Australia, and New Zealand.
I'm Ben Shapiro, and this is Hardwired. So, why are the media covering up the brutality of Planned Parenthood? Because it might make you uncomfortable. Worse, it might make Democrats uncomfortable because Democrats love Planned Parenthood. The Democratic Party platform stands for the ability of a woman to crush her baby's head 1 minute before birth, and they want you to pay for it. It's actually in their platform. Quote, Democratic Party strongly and unequivocally supports Roe v. Wade and a woman's right to make decisions regarding her pregnancy, including a safe and legal abortion, regardless of ability to pay.
Following the surrender of German forces in 1945, Allied soldiers uncovered the horrific reality of Nazi death camps such as Auschwitz, Dachau, and Belsen. At least 11 million people, including Jews, Slavs, disabled people, and homosexuals, had been murdered as a result of Nazi genocidal policy.
There have been various applications of eugenics, perhaps the most famous being the Germans before and during World War II, which was condemned by the Nuremberg war crimes trials.
But we treat these innocent human lives as junk for the garbage disposal. During the first 3 months of pregnancy, doctors plunge a tube with an edged tip into the womb. They then use the suction power of the tube to literally tear apart the child while it's alive, and then suck the pieces out of the mother's womb. This is called suction aspiration.
Simply put, the Great Replacement is the alleged replacement of whites by non-whites. It often overlaps with a larger theory called the white genocide conspiracy theory, which revolves around the beliefs that powerful people are trying to prevent whites from having kids. Often the conspiracy is blamed on, you guessed it, Jewish people. This theory is manipulative because it equates normal patterns of immigration with murder. It's trying to put a big equals sign between the new Salvadoran or Syrian who lives down the street and a mental image of a concentration camp.
The term eugenics is basically a set of beliefs and practices that aim to improve the genetic quality of a human population. Historically, by excluding people and groups judged to be inferior and promoting those judged to be superior.
He argued that a rigid system of selection through the elimination of those who were weak or unfit would solve the whole question in 100 years, as well as enable us to get rid of the undesirables who crowd our jails, hospitals, and insane asylums. The Passing of the Great Race was the first non-German book to be reprinted by the Nazis when they took power. Hitler himself wrote to Grant saying, "The book is my Bible." Hitler also deeply admired Henry Ford. As well as his motor company, Ford owned a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent, which, from 1920 onwards, regularly published articles on the so-called Jewish question. The articles employed all the classic anti-Semitic conspiratorial tropes, that Jews secretly ran the world, controlled the media, and started wars for their own profit. These articles proved highly popular among the American public and were published in a book as The International Jew. This book went on to become a huge influence on many leaders of the Nazi Party. Baldur von Schirach, head of the Hitler Youth, said, "The decisive anti-Semitic book I was reading and the book that influenced my comrades was that book by Henry Ford, The International Jew. I read it and became anti-Semitic." Hitler had a large portrait of Ford in his office, and in 1938 Ford was awarded the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest medal Nazi Germany could bestow on a foreigner. He had, after all, helped to inspire the Nazi project.
President Obama, as a state senator in Illinois, he actually called for a fully formed living baby to be killed after birth. He said such a child was merely a fetus outside of the mother's womb.
They dehumanize the preborn child by using terms such as pro-abortion, fetus, product, etc.
Now, obviously, if they literally did that, then you and I wouldn't fall for the messaging. Therefore, the messengers have to be a little bit more subtle about it. And lately, they've gotten pretty good at manipulating us. Here's the thing though, not only are those who preach about the Great Replacement theory manipulating us, but as it turns out, the entire theory is bullcrap. It's literally not backed by evidence at all. There is no secret plot to get rid of white folks, but let's just say that there was. Well, they must be doing a pretty poor job, eh? Since there are more white folks now than ever before. You might be thinking, well, duh, Mr. Beat, but whites represent a smaller percentage of the proportion of the world. Well, who counts as white isn't based on genetics or even demographics. It's based on politics. In the United States, for example, Irish Americans, Italian Americans, and Polish Americans weren't considered white until the early 1900s. Greek Americans weren't white until just a few decades ago. Some Arab Americans used to be considered white, but by the end of the 1900s were no longer considered white. Even though race isn't a biological reality, it has still been a way for people in power to divide us up over the years. Not only that, immigration is simply currently not high enough, nor will it likely ever be, to make it so that skin color, values, or culture will completely change in one country.
That policy was directly inspired by the pseudoscience of eugenics, the idea that it's possible and desirable to improve the genetic quality of a human population. And while the Allies naturally abhorred the detestable crimes of the Nazis and punished the wrongdoers after the war, the uncomfortable truth is that Britain and America were the original breeding grounds for those same eugenic ideas.
That's how Democrats think. We have it on gruesome tape. Here's a top Planned Parenthood doctor talking about how to use less crunchy techniques to kill babies so that their organs can be more easily sold.
How he feels about using a less crunchy technique to get more whole specimens.
Dallin Oaks, in his speech at Brigham Young University on February 9th, 1999, read a pro-eugenics, pro-abortion letter that he, Apostle Dallin H. Oaks, embraces, wherein I quote, "The woman's right to choose what will or will not happen to her body is obviously violated by rape or incest."
But the Germans did not invent eugenics. In fact, they were inspired by the founder of the taxpayer-funded Planned Parenthood.
Modern eugenics had its origin in the 19th century with British scientist Francis Galton. A polymath who made important contributions to many fields, Galton was hugely influenced by his cousin Charles Darwin's Origin of Species. In his first chapter, titled Variation Under Domestication, Darwin explains how different breeds within a species are often produced from a common ancestor by a process of selective breeding.
Sure, there will be demographic changes, and there already has been, but there is no evidence that these recent demographic changes have dramatically changed the dominant culture and values of any one country. We often just see cultural assimilation. Oh, cultural assimilation is the process in which a minority culture gets absorbed into the dominant culture of a society. Not that that matters, as these immigrants already share American values. That's why they're coming here. And the different cultures they bring are almost always beneficial to American society. Also, most immigrants, and especially their children, assimilate peacefully into the existing culture, which, by the way, is constantly changing anyway, and has always been multicultural. This is no surprise to me, as I've had many students who were the kids of immigrants, but if I didn't know they were the kids of immigrants, I would have assumed that their family had been in this country for many generations.
When conception results in such a case, the woman has the moral as well as the legal right to an abortion, because the condition of pregnancy is the result of someone else's irresponsibility, not hers. She does not have to take responsibility for it. To force her by law to carry the fetus to term would be a further violation of her rights.
And here's another top Planned Parenthood doctor talking about the ease with which baby intestines can be harvested and eyeballs can be extracted.
These orbits are good too, and at this stage you start to get the retinal pigment epithelium, which is in the back, which is you've collected that before.
So all the orbits are so easy.
So then it just comes down to skin color, and if you're really concerned that skin colors of all humans in your society might change, have you ever stopped to ask yourself, why? Skin pigmentation is highly correlated with distance from the equator. That's right. The random lottery of how far you are from this line determines what color you get to be. The primary pigment in human skin is melanin, which is used to protect us from the sun. Just because your friend Jessica doesn't get sunburnt as often as you doesn't make her any less human. More than that, this distribution of colors has changed a lot over human history, and Europeans from even just 8,000 years ago looked dramatically different than they do today. Keep in mind that for the vast majority of human history, humans with lighter skin pigmentation have not existed.
The truth behind the genesis of that organization and its founder are much darker than most Americans realize. Who was the real Margaret Sanger? Why was she heralded by the Third Reich as the greatest socialist in America? Why do modern Democrats who claim to support the African American population justify presenting her as a cultural icon?
Galton was the first person to apply Darwin's ideas to humans. Convinced that traits like intelligence and ability were entirely determined by genetics, he asked whether it would be possible to give the more suitable races of blood a better chance of prevailing over the less suitable than they otherwise would have had.
That's just delightful. A third top Planned Parenthood doctor negotiated over baby body part prices while standing over a tray of dissected children.
I think the per item thing works a little better just because we can see how much we can get out of it.
Number 8. It now remains for the United States government to set a sensible example to the world by offering a bonus or a yearly pension to all obviously unfit parents who allow themselves to be sterilized by harmless and scientific means. Margaret Sanger, the woman heralded by the Democrats and left-wing ideologues in the United States for her positions on women's reproductive rights, always failed to include her genocidal positions on ethnic cleansing. She died on September 6, 1966 in Tucson, Arizona. But Margaret Sanger was not alone. The late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said in a New York Times interview, "Frankly, I had thought that at the time Roe was decided, there was concern about population growth and particularly growth in populations that we don't want to have too many of." In Elle magazine, Ginsburg also stated that poor people should have ready access to abortions because it makes no sense as a national policy to promote birth only among poor people. In 2015, out of $1.29 billion in total revenue, $553.7 million came from the government reimbursing Planned Parenthood for their services. In 2020, Planned Parenthood performed 383,460 abortions, the highest number of abortions it has yet reported, and an increase of nearly 28,600 from the previous year. And in the United States, the abortion rate for black women is almost 5 times that for white women.
She also has the right to refuse an abortion. This would give her the right to the fetus and also the responsibility for it.
In 1883, Galton gave his new idea a name, eugenics, which he defined as the science of improving stock.
So who came up with the Great Replacement Theory? Well, apparently this dude came up with a modern concept of the Great Replacement Theory, René Camus, a French writer who at least popularized the term with a couple books, the first of which came out in 2010. Camus argued that white Europeans were being disproportionately replaced by immigrants from Africa and the Middle East, which could lead to the, quote, extinction of whites. Camus particularly was afraid of Muslim immigration, arguing they often had a much higher birth rate than whites, even though around 40% of Muslims identify as, white. But I digress. It's not surprising that white supremacists were attracted to Camus' Great Replacement Theory, but incredibly it became fairly mainstream by the time I first encountered it in this 2017 video by, what was her name? Warren Northern? Yeah, I think that was it. Well, the video has since been taken down, but still, back in 2017, it did very well, and just Warren casually bringing up the theory like it ain't no thing was surprising. It was proof that Camus had given white supremacists a powerful argument to use, even if that argument was false. Since then, his followers have described immigration as an invasion, and they generally promote the idea that non-white immigrants, whatever that means, have dramatically different values than whites and are trying to erase white culture. Isn't it just another version of xenophobia? I mean, yeah. Basically. Yeah, before Camus popularized his Great Replacement theory going back more than 100 years before that in France, there was a nationalist, anti-non-white immigrant movement brewing there. In fact, in most of the Western world, going back to the 1800s, there have been similar movements, especially due to the increase of immigrants to the Western world from African and Asian countries. Because of this xenophobia, many people in Western countries called for nativism, or the policy of protecting native-born citizens over immigrants. Xenophobia hasn't always been about skin color. In the United States, for example, many nativists hated the Irish, Catholics, Jewish people. This is what led to groups like the Ku Klux Klan.
Now, naturally, Hillary Clinton thinks the people who do this are just wonderful.
I'm proud to stand with Planned Parenthood.
But when Hillary Clinton is shown video of Planned Parenthood doctors talking about selling organs, even she pretends to find it, quote, disturbing. People who claim they're disturbed by the sale of baby organs, but are totally fine with the crushing of their heads, are moral idiots. It's like saying you're disturbed by the whipping of American slaves, but not by anyone holding them as slaves in the first place.
Margaret Sanger was born on September 14, 1879 in Corning, New York. She is an icon to left-wing groups due to her founding of Planned Parenthood in October 1916 with her sister Ethel Byrne and Fanny Amendel, which was the first birth control clinic in Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York.
One would think that an apostle of the Mormon Church would never espouse the terminology that is in the above letter. Also, you wouldn't think he would use words like calling the baby a fetus or calling the baby it. That is, unless he wished to dehumanize the little baby who needs to be born, so that the baby's life can be taken through an abortion. And no one has the moral as well as the legal right to take the life of an innocent, helpless baby. Eugenicists believe that through abortion, birth control, and modern science, they can have a utopian society.
9 days later, the police raided the clinic and arrested all the people involved for promoting birth control, which was illegal. Sanger refused to pay the fine and spent 30 days in jail.
Here's the truth. Abortion ends a human life. The science is settled. By 3 weeks after sperm meets egg, the baby's brain, spinal cord, heart, and other organs begin forming. That's about the time when most women notice they're pregnant in the first place.
By the turn of the 20th century, Britain's ruling establishment was looking for ways to make Britain a stronger, healthier, and more productive nation. Galton's ideas began to attract interest. Eugenics was seen as a panacea. If the population was simply made better, then so many problems would be solved, from crime to poverty to mental illness. The liberal reformer William Beveridge, architect of the welfare state, and the economist John Maynard Keynes, a key thinker in 20th century liberal economics, were both prominent supporters. Even British liberals and progressives became enthusiastic about policies such as forced sterilisation, which, if enacted, they believed could eradicate negative traits from the population. These negative traits ranged from specific mental disabilities to more abstract characteristics such as laziness or criminality, which many at the time believed were inherited.
Oh, goodness gracious. But the Great Replacement theory is different in that it has found widespread appeal online. Media-savvy white supremacists have been successful making it appealing to people who are, definitely not white supremacists. This might be because now they say Great Replacement instead of white genocide. Even a member of Congress, Steve King of Iowa, endorsed the theory. The scariest thing about this being so mainstream is that it has led to violence. A lot of it. In 2011, this guy from Norway wrote a 1,500-page manifesto explaining his fear of white ethnic replacement by migrants from the Middle East and North Africa. He then killed 77 in a terrorist attack. In 2018, this guy from Pennsylvania posted online that Jews were responsible for the Great Replacement and they needed to be killed. He then went on to kill 11 people in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Some of those were Holocaust survivors. The next year, this guy from Texas also wrote a manifesto that said he was going to defend his country from a, quote, cultural and ethnic replacement brought on by an invasion of Hispanics. He then went on to kill 23 people at a Walmart in El Paso. And then, of course, the Buffalo shooting, which happened while we made this video, also was inspired by the Great Replacement theory. Now, obviously, not everyone who falls for these lies will commit a mass murder. But anyone, including me and you, can fall for Great Replacement theory messaging since they use manipulative tactics to make false claims sound plausible. And if we're not careful and critical, we can be manipulated and heck, we could even be radicalized by this stuff.
They now believe that they have the modern tools of abortion, birth control, and now in the biotech age, genetic engineering, on which they can eliminate the undesirable elements of our society, the defective, the infirm, the mentally deficient, and violent criminals.
The Eugenics Education Society was founded in 1907. It argued, among other things, that poverty was rooted in the genetic deficiency of the working classes, and that the feeble-minded should be prevented from having children. 30 years before he led Britain to victory against Nazi Germany, Winston Churchill was honorary vice president of the Eugenics Education Society.
By week 4, we've got early facial features. By week 7, the baby has toes. By week 9, the baby is developing external genitalia. By week 10, the baby has started growing fingernails. And that's all in the first trimester. That's the least controversial abortion period.
For the rest of this video, we're going to look at how people fall for the Great Replacement theory and look at how you can avoid falling for it too. Those who tend to promote the Great Replacement theory often use the same talking points. They are all bullcrap, but persist anyway. Talking point number 1. Biology is destiny. It's manipulative because when we hear biology, we think, oh, it's science, so it has to be legit, right? This one says that culture is genetically determined and that genetic features predetermine cultural traits. For example, they might say that all of the problems in the African American community and in all of Africa are rooted in inferior genetics or culture. In other words, they say that black people inherently are less intelligent or more likely to be violent. It's bullcrap. It's been disproven by decades of scholarly research. For example, many outcomes from measures of intelligence to violence are driven by socioeconomic status and income inequality. There is absolutely no evidence that biology is the driving factor. For example, African Americans perform similarly to other Americans when given access to the same opportunities.
He didn't travel the country preaching her concept. Sanger then founded the American Birth Control League in 1921. Sanger also endorsed the 1927 decision Buck v. Bell, in which the Supreme Court ruled that states could forcibly sterilize people deemed unfit without their consent and sometimes without their knowledge. This American law would be the major defense at Nuremberg for the Nazi defendants who were doctors practicing Sanger's methods, and many would be found not guilty as a result of this defense.
In 1910, Churchill warned Prime Minister Herbert Henry Asquith about the very terrible danger to the race posed by the multiplication of the unfit. And as Home Secretary, Churchill went on to propose a series of eugenic policies, including forced sterilisation and the prevention of marriage between those judged mentally unfit. He also planned labour colonies where the criminally feeble-minded could be detained. Long before anyone knew Hitler's name, Churchill was using the sort of language that would later be used by the Nazis to describe those who failed to live up to the standards of the master race.
She was friends with the racist Democratic President Woodrow Wilson, Democratic fundraiser, and automobile maker Henry Ford, who was also friends with Adolf Hitler and a rabid anti-Semite and hater of black Americans. Margaret Sanger's rabid racism, anti-Semitism, and violent suggestions on eliminating all non-whites from American society endeared her to the eugenics crowd. She wanted an all-white, healthy, intelligent society built upon the concept of racial eradication years before Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party were even a thought. In 1934, the Nazi Party adopted her radical positions, with Goebbels saying, "Margaret Sanger is the best National Socialist in America." In fact, the September 15, 1935 Nuremberg laws classified races according to an insane chart drafted by Dr. Wilhelm Stuckart and Dr. Friedrich Kritzinger. The official name was the Reich Citizenship Law and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. These laws embodied many of the racial theories underpinning Nazi ideology, which they adapted from Margaret Sanger. These laws could provide the legal framework for the systematic persecution of Jews in Germany, who at that time were deemed a race and not a religion, and the eugenics behind them were taken from the world of Sanger. In fact, her theories and opinions influenced men like SS Captain Dr. Josef Mengele, the Beast of Auschwitz, and his associates, Dr. Karl Klauberg, Dr. Hertha Oberhäuser, Hitler's personal physician Dr. Karl Brandt, just to name a few.
I once met a lady on a train trip who came to my aid when I was having a heated debate with another woman who thought it was okay to have an abortion if a woman was raped. The lady on the seat behind me interrupted the debate and said she had been raped when she was young and that she carried the baby to full term and raised the baby boy into a very good man who is successful and has a wife and children. She says he is the light of her life, even though he came from a violent rape. The other woman was silenced by her story. Killing a preborn child just because his father was a rapist or because of incest is a very evil concept. We must not kill babies for these heinous reasons, or for any reason. How many tens of thousands of innocent little babies have been brutally murdered for these poor excuses?
Talking point number 2. We are brave to speak the truth, and the normies are cowards. It's manipulative because it's fun to be in a secret club and have access to secret information. Basically, this one says that people with racist beliefs are actually countercultural truth tellers. They're not sheep who conform. Yeah, if conforming means not being racist, I think we ought to conform then. And for people who don't conform, they sure use the same talking points a lot.
Following upon Sanger's eugenics platform, disguised as giving women access to birth control, the ABCL became Planned Parenthood Federation of America in 1942, after birth control was no longer considered illegal, at least among married couples. During this period, Sanger had critics and supporters. The supporters even today claim that she condemned abortion, arguing that it would not be needed if every woman had access to birth control.
Around the same time, eugenics took root in the United States. In 1906, the inventor of cornflakes, J.H. Kellogg, founded the Race Betterment Foundation in Michigan. In 1911, the eugenicist Charles Davenport founded the Eugenics Record Office in New York. Kellogg and Davenport believed that eugenic policies could alleviate the economic burden caused by certain undesirable members of society, especially the disabled and the mentally ill. They enjoyed the financial backing of huge corporate foundations, including the Carnegie Institute and the Rockefeller Foundation. They held conferences, printed adverts for eugenic marriages, and published published their research in journals and newspapers. The campaigns worked. In 1907, the state of Indiana passed the first compulsory sterilization law in the world.
Talking point number 3. Diversity is conflict. It's manipulative because the vast majority of us fear conflict. And this one says that diversity automatically causes conflict. It often relies on cherry-picking evidence and studies to back up its claim. It's bullcrap. There is plenty of research that actually shows that diversity enriches societies, even in the ways the haters claim to care about. For example, diverse groups of problem solvers often outperform groups of high performers on really tough problems. And that makes sense because tough problems need new perspectives. It's how we got automatic elevator doors, basketball, and the iPhone. That's right, that thing you're watching this video on right now wouldn't exist without diversity.
By 1924, 15 different states had passed similar legislation. These laws were passed in the hope that those deemed unfit to reproduce and the mentally ill wouldn't be able to pass on their inferior genes to the next generation. And these were popular policies. A 1937 Fortune magazine poll found that 2/3 of Americans supported eugenic sterilization of mental defectives and 63% supported sterilization of criminals. Between 1907 and 1963, over 65,000 people were sterilized against their will. Relative to the American population, a disproportionate number of those targeted were Black, Hispanic, and Native American women. This demonstrates just how quickly the idea of eradicating negative traits was unmasked as a racist agenda.
Unpleasant? Try dilation and curettage. In this version of abortion, doctors use a curette, which chops up the baby inside the womb and then scrapes it right out. As the baby grows, the methods of abortion get uglier and uglier. There's dilation and evacuation, in which doctors use a forceps to crush the baby, including its brain and spine. The pieces are then removed.
For who is to say what contributions, what genius, what intelligence we destroy and lose when we do these oh so very wrong things and destroy our society?
What they leave out is that Sanger only opposed abortions if that meant not producing the best, healthiest, most intelligent from Caucasian couples. For blacks, Jews, and brown-skinned people, as well as low IQ white people and those with birth defects, they were not to be allowed. This was what the Nazis adopted. Ironically, in 1966, Planned Parenthood began issuing its Margaret Sanger Awards annually to honor individuals of distinction in recognition of excellence and leadership in furthering reproductive health and reproductive rights.
And as a last resort, doctors use partial birth abortion. Democrats love partial birth abortion. This is a procedure in which doctors use an ultrasound. They find a baby's legs with the forceps. They pull it into the birth canal. They deliver the entire baby except for the head. And then they stab the baby in the skull with the scissors, insert a suction tube into the skull, and suck out the brains.
However, the organization very quietly and without any fanfare stopped this practice as Black Lives Matter rose to prominence. It would have been seen as the height of hypocrisy to have a liberal-backed domestic terror group that attacked white America connected to Sanger, a Democrat darling who wanted to exterminate blacks.
Talking point number 4. Whites are being exploited. It's manipulative because people naturally don't want to be taken advantage of. This one says whites are victims of diversity and says that whites are being taken advantage of by non-whites and, quote, race traitors, or whites that don't have these views. They argue that it's natural for humans to act in the interest of their own race, even at the expense of others outside of their group. It's bullcrap. Remember, powerful people created the whole idea of race in order to divide us and to justify their place at the top of social hierarchies. Also, how exactly are whites being exploited? This is manipulative because it points to a vague threat to make you feel scared, yet doesn't provide good evidence of specific exploitation of whites. And remember, humans cooperating and working together is what built, all of human history.
Eugenics led American policymakers to acts even more atrocious than forced sterilization. A 1911 Carnegie report explored 18 different potential methods for removing defective genetic attributes and proposed euthanasia at number 8. One influential American textbook, Applied Eugenics by Paul Popenoe of the American Eugenics Society, argued that the first method which presents itself to cleanse the gene pool is execution. Its value in keeping up the standard of the race should not be underestimated. These ideas were actually put into practice in some states. One mental institution in Lincoln, Illinois, fed its patients milk that had been infected with tuberculosis in order that the genetically weak among them would be killed off.
This is also the preferred method for ensuring that the internal organs are best preserved, so Planned Parenthood can hawk them to Big Pharma.
In fact, the last recipient of the award listed on the website is Dr. Willie Parker in 2015. Then it just quietly disappeared. Parker was an abortionist known for his contentious claims that his Christian faith influenced his work.
Taken in total, these various forms of abortion and others are used to murder approximately 3,000 babies every single day in America.
Talking point number 5. Things used to be so much better. It's manipulative because we generally all love nostalgia or an emotional connection to a period in the past. This one tries to inspire nostalgia for an imaginary past when things were better and tradition was respected. In particular, this talking point revolves around the myth that, quote, racial purity used to be a thing and that racial groups used to live separately, and because of that, things were better. It's bullcrap.
For eugenicists across the globe, the United States was the shining example of what eugenics could achieve. In Mein Kampf, published in 1925, Hitler lavished praise on American eugenicists. He claimed that he had studied with great interest the laws of several American states concerning prevention of reproduction by people whose progeny would be of no value or be injurious to the racial stock.
Talking point number 6. The Jews are to blame. Yeah, do I really have to explain this one? I made a whole video on the history of anti-Semitism, if you also want to check that one out. There are also things to watch out for, what I call Great Replacement Theory red flags. Those who tend to promote the Great Replacement Theory also use shocking images to dehumanize non-whites. They bring up IQ a lot. They bring up Marx, as in Karl Marx, and they bring up cultural Marxism a lot. They bring up open borders a lot. They often refer to migration as an invasion. They tend to talk trash about diversity and multiculturalism. They tend to use certain rhetorical strategies to make radical views seem not so radical at all. Probably the most common rhetorical strategy is limited framing. Limited framing is usually applied in videos in which the host on screen will put boundaries on the discussion to make someone with crazy views seem more reasonable. Basically, they leave out the more controversial stuff and focus on the less controversial stuff they are saying, like that Warren Northern video I mentioned earlier. And to deflect a bit and to convince you that their opinions are not so crazy after all, they'll say things like, people are saying, if you get angry at their opinions, they might say, you mad bro, to attempt to make it seem like you're overreacting. Or weak. They present their information as if they are giving the uncomfortable truth that is a threat to the elites, or the establishment, or the New World Order, or the globalists, or even just they.
He was accused of sexual assault in 2019, which he denied, but he still resigned from all of his professional positions in 2020. Other recipients of the Margaret Sanger Award include House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and actresses Jane Fonda and Katharine Hepburn.
Hitler and Churchill agreed America was doing a great job of eradicating the unfit through eugenic legislation.
That's over 1 million babies a year. That's 55 million children since Roe v. Wade.
Margaret Sanger was one of the few women to be given an honorific title and inducted into the Ku Klux Klan, and exalted by none other than Adolf Hitler and Dr. Joseph Goebbels.
One American eugenicist Hitler particularly admired was the lawyer Madison Grant. In 1916, Grant published The Passing of the Great Race, in which he lamented the pollution of the Nordic race by other inferior races. Grant was less coy than earlier eugenicists about the racist basis of his thinking. To him, the solution was clear. The American population needed to be purified through immigration restriction, selective breeding, and sterilization.
And finally, Great Replacement Theory promoters often use memes. Seriously. In fact, memes are a big reason why the Great Replacement theory has spread in recent years. So let's look at some memes and see if you can spot these Great Replacement theory red flags. Oh yeah, first of all, this is literally a limited frame. The person who put this together wanted you to believe that this photo was of men from Afghanistan fleeing the country to the United States after it fell to the Taliban in the summer of 2021. However, and I had to do a lot of digging to find this out, this photo is actually a group of immigrants returning to Afghanistan from Turkey in 2018. What helped me researching it is doing a reverse image search of the photo, and I suggest you do the same whenever you come across any photo that gets you fired up. So the first red flag is the picture.
Number 7. Every single case of inherited defect, every malformed child, every congenitally tainted human being brought into this world is of infinite importance to that poor individual. But it is scarcely less important to the rest of us and to all of our children who must pay in one way or another for these biological and racial mistakes. When Hitler authorized the Action T4 euthanasia program to murder the handicapped, mentally ill, and other undesirables from German society, the doctors and nurses were given the program directly from Margaret Sanger's own philosophy. On August 18, 1939, the Reich Ministry of the Interior circulated a decree requiring all physicians, nurses, and midwives to report newborn infants and children under the age of 3 who showed signs of severe mental or physical disability. The man who started the program was Dr. Karl Brandt, and they were disguised as children's clinics and advertised that they would treat their abnormalities and infirmities. In fact, they were death centers, where the children were quietly killed and the cause of death misrepresented as by other means, such as pneumonia, tuberculosis, etc. Dr. Brandt himself claimed that Sanger's methods were most effective and, if performed correctly, are ingenious. In Sanger's own words, she peddled racism, eugenics, contraception, abortion, while demonstrating a visceral hatred for children, parenthood, marriage, and the Catholic Church. The following quotes are directly from Margaret Sanger's own writings and interviews. 1. The most merciful thing that the large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. 2. A marriage license shall in itself give husband and wife only the right to a common household and not the right of parenthood. 3. All of our problems are the result of overbreeding among the working class. Knowledge of birth control is essentially moral. Its general, though prudent, practice must lead to a higher individuality and ultimately to a cleaner race. 4. Blacks, soldiers, and Jews are a menace to the human race. Number 5. The masses of Negroes, particularly in the South, still breed carelessly and disastrously, with the result that the increase among Negroes, even more than among whites, is from that portion of the population least intelligent and fit. Number 6. Birth control appeals to the advanced radical because it is calculated to undermine the authority of the Christian churches. I look forward to seeing humanity free someday of the tyranny of Christianity, no less than capitalism.
The media want to keep us blind to these facts, or perhaps we want to blind ourselves. But by blinding ourselves to murder, we become complicit in it.
In July 2020, Planned Parenthood quietly removed Margaret Sanger's name from its headquarters in Manhattan, New York. Obviously, the Times had caught up with Margaret Sanger.
But his rallying cry was ignored. When Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, one of the earliest laws he passed was the Law for the Prevention of Hereditary Diseased Offspring, which enabled the compulsory sterilization of citizens with genetic disorders. This legislation was directly based on the model eugenical sterilization law devised by the American eugenicist Harry L. Laughlin. Germany was imitating the American states, which had already passed the same laws. Harry Laughlin was given an honorary degree by Heidelberg University for his work in the science of racial cleansing. And upon returning from Germany in 1934, one California eugenicist congratulated his colleagues with the words, "You will be interested to know that your work has played a powerful part in shaping the opinions of the group of intellectuals who are behind Hitler in this epoch-making program. Everywhere I sense that their opinions have been tremendously stimulated by American thought." Under the Nazi regime, over 400,000 people were sterilized against their will. Among them were the disabled, the blind, the deaf, those of mixed race, schizophrenics, and even alcoholics. 2 years after the Nazis began their sterilization program, they passed the infamous Nuremberg Laws in 1935, which forbade marriage between Germans and Jews and excluded Jews from Reich citizenship. These laws laid the legal groundwork for the persecution of Jews in Germany. They echoed American legislation, particularly the laws which banned marriage between white and black Americans, and the Jim Crow segregation laws, which institutionalized economic, social, and educational disadvantages for African Americans. It wasn't a great leap from sterilization to the next stage of Nazi racial policy, the involuntary euthanasia program, Action T4, which began in 1939. As part of this program, up to 300,000 disabled people were killed in psychiatric hospitals across Germany and the occupied territories. Patients were transferred from their hospitals to special treatment centers run by teams of SS men wearing white coats in order to give a sense of medical professionalism. They were then taken into shower blocks and gassed to death using bottled carbon monoxide. Their bodies were cremated en masse, and false death certificates were written up and sent to relatives. This euthanasia model was then adapted and expanded as part of the final solution to the Jewish question. At the end of 1941, the first extermination camps were constructed in occupied territories. These were places designed specifically. It's not difficult to see how the same eugenic ideology that brought about forced sterilization led to segregation, forced euthanasia, and eventually to the extermination camps of Nazi Germany. In reaching its fullest expression, the British-born eugenics movement that inspired the Holocaust was revealed for what it was, a genocidal project of racial cleansing. Support for eugenics decreased dramatically during the 1940s as news emerged of what was happening at Auschwitz and other extermination camps, in the form of eyewitness reports from escaped prisoners and information leaked from the Nazi high command. What followed was a rewriting of history that erased the role played by the UK and the US in the development of eugenics. In the decades following World War II, many eugenic societies changed their names, and former eugenicists entered other fields of scientific research. The history books used in schools never mentioned it, but eugenic policies continued to be carried out in the US. As recently as 2011, a report revealed that 148 female prisoners in 2 California state prisons were sterilized without adequate informed consent between 2006 and 2011. In the post-war years, Britain and America helped to prosecute Nazi leaders during the Nuremberg trials. But as the chief US prosecutor wrote to President Harry Truman, the Allies themselves have done or are doing some of the very things we are prosecuting the Germans for. As the old Native American proverb has it, those who tell the stories rule the world. British and American eugenics is a story that has been purposefully not told, perhaps because to admit our involvement is simply too painful. It's easier just to pretend it never happened. But the words "never again" will only ring true if we tell the story of our own past and acknowledge the role played by Britain and the US in the rise of the eugenics movement, a movement that was key to the development of Hitler's genocidal ideology.
Next, of course, there's the red flag of calling accepting refugees into a country an invasion. 2 red flags right off the bat with this one. One, again, is that word, invading. And second is the shocking image, to dehumanize. This also hits at talking point number 3. Diversity is conflict. This picture was circulated claiming to be a picture of refugees fighting with police in Germany in 2015 at the height of the refugee crisis. It was used to manipulate people into being afraid of refugees. Well, the picture was actually taken in 2012 and had nothing to do with the refugee crisis. There's the IQ red flag, of course, and then they just show a picture of supposedly French black people, although I couldn't find where this picture originated from. And so who knows where these people are actually from? And they're not even really trying that hard anymore. They're just showing a picture of black people next to unsubstantiated text. Folks can't even stand peacefully without these manipulators looking for a way to weaponize their image. Hey, I can do that too, see? I could write literally anything. It doesn't make it true. And while that link at the bottom goes to a real study, it has nothing to do with rising immigration in France. But how many people would actually click on it to look at that study? Probably not many, okay? This also hits at talking point number 1, biology is destiny. This fits the formula of giving the uncomfortable truth that is a threat to the elites, or in this case, they. Who are they, by the way? I've always wanted to know who they were. Anyway, this also hits talking point number 1, biology is destiny, talking about, quote, third worlders, and talking point number 4, whites are being exploited. Oof. This one is especially horrendous. Talking point number 4, whites are being exploited. Talking point number 6, the Jews are to blame. And a bunch of stuff about IQ and marks. And there's the giving of the uncomfortable truth that is a threat to the elites. So here is a picture of the mayor of the London borough of Camden. She is the first black mayor of Camden, and no, is not a supremacist of any kind. What I particularly found fascinating about this one is that the meme implies she needs to be deported back home. Well, I guess deport her to Camden then, since she's lived there her whole life? There are many, many more examples I found online, but at this point, I'm just getting worn out by all the fear and hate. So let's just wrap this up. The bottom line is the Great Replacement Theory is still a big movement because its proponents have done well to play on the natural fears people have of economic and social instability and just change in general. In case you haven't noticed, things haven't been all peachy for the majority of us lately. The world has plenty of problems. Often, it's easier for us to just place blame on certain groups, and groups that are less like us are easy targets. So what can you do in response to Great Replacement Theory manipulation? Number 1, probe the point. Does the content use one of these common talking points that are not backed by evidence? Number 2, fish for flags. Are there any red flags present? Like regular mentions of IQ, use of words like invasion and shocking images? Number 3, resist the rhetoric. Is there use of a rhetorical strategy like limited framing, reference to a mysterious elitist majority they, or use of logical fallacies? And number 4, mind the meme. Remember that memes are easy to share but difficult to fact check. Make sure to reverse image search to understand a picture's true context, and do your own research before you share a meme yourself. These are some small steps you can take to make sure that you don't fall for this messaging, and in general, make society a safer and more peaceful place for all of us. Speaking of all of us, we can't be replaced because humans reproduce. We just make more humans. Let's end this video with a thought experiment. Imagine if you met someone from a foreign country who looked a lot different than you. They had a different religion than you. They liked different foods and music than you. Heck, they didn't even speak your language. But you fell in love with them anyway, and you both got married and had kids and lived happily ever after. Wait, about your future kids. You'd love them too, wouldn't you? They can't replace us because they are us. Don't be fooled. Human differences are really small, so we don't have to fear each other. Instead, let's just get to know each other. Thanks for watching this video. This is one of the most difficult videos I've ever had to make, and I know I'm gonna get some hate online for this, but it's a topic that I felt like I should tackle because a lot of people haven't really tackled it. So hopefully you at least are thinking differently about things now, and thank you for watching.